There's a great book by George Mason professor Zachary Schrag called The Great Society Subway, A History of the Washington Metro. And in it, Dr. Schrag highlights a Arlington Planning Commission meeting where the planning director argued that rail transport would be too expensive and slow, and that we'd be better served to hire helicopters to meet the task. And Paul, I don't know if that question might come up tonight. In fairness, that planning commissioner and many Arlingtonians did ultimately throw their support behind Metro. It did come to fruition, and we have seen a lot of benefit from it, not just getting around, but also our metro corridors in Arlington being hubs for developments such as the RB corridor, Pentagon City, the airport, and more. But that was 40 years ago, and now, 40 years on, Metro is faced with substantial challenges, amongst which safety concerns, including some incidents that have resulted in serious injury and even a few fatalities, performance issues, maintenance issues leading to delays and disruptions in our service. Someone at my table was mentioning single tracking before. And fiscal challenges, including a somewhat unwieldy fiscal structure stretching across several jurisdictions in 2 different states and the District of Columbia. The D.C. region has plenty of tough, high-stakes jobs. Being the general manager of Metro is probably very high on that list. And tonight, we will hear from the general manager and CEO of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, or WMATA, or Metro, Paul Wiedefeld.
Thank you, Scott, and excuse me. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me here. Can you hear me okay? I apologize. I've been, since the blizzard, I've been fighting a cold. I have to get into a doctor, to be frank. Excuse me. But thank you so much for inviting me. I did notice you were 1954 is when you were established, so I was born the next year. So I know exactly how old you are. And I don't like to be reminded of that. But what I thought I'd do is just give you a little bit of my background, and then I thought I'd share with you some of my observations on the system, and then some of my priorities, and then just open it up for questions. I'll be fairly brief. Just by way of background, I'm actually Baltimore born and raised. I've been in the transportation business for 35 years, 25 years in the public sector, and 10 years in the private sector. In that time, I've managed the Maryland Department of Transportation's capital budget, and the Maryland Department of Transportation is like the federal US DOT, where it's all modes of transportation under that. I've worked for Parsons Brinckerhoff 2 times, a big engineering firm, and have done a number of projects with them. I ran BWI Airport actually twice. I ran them in 2002 for about 4 years or so. So if you ever use the Southwest Terminal or the rental car facility there or the big garages and all, that was the work that we did when I was there. And then I left there and then worked, I managed the Baltimore Metro transit system, which is a combination of metro, subway, light rail, bus, paratransit, and the MARC system, which you'll be more familiar with. And then I went back to BWI and ran that for another 8 years. And then recently was asked to move on from there, as governors do change sometimes. I am the way I like to frame it is I'm political, I'm not partisan in the way that I approach my career. I'm a professional in what I do. I work in a political environment, I get all that, but I generally don't play the partisan side of that equation. So sometimes that works well and sometimes it doesn't. So anyway, so it's kind of interesting though, because shortly thereafter leaving there, I was approached by a number of people because I've worked in the business community in the Washington region for a number of years, particularly because of the airport and grown BWI to be the #1 airport in the Baltimore, Washington region in terms of passengers. And so I had to go back to my boss who had just said that it was time for me to move on and ask, well, by the way, could I get one of your votes? Because I need one of the votes to get this job. And there was no problem because I think my reputation it is what it is. So anyway, that's my professional background. I have an apartment here in the district. I still live in Towson, Maryland. I have a daughter 16 years old. And if any of you have children that age or have been through that, there's no way I'm touching that. I'm leaving that alone. I have another year and a half, or almost less than a year and a half now, for her to finish school, and then we'll revisit where we go after that. My wife actually graduated from GW, so we, a lot of roots in this area. So anyway, with that, I've been on the job since November 30th, which is exactly 2 months and 17 days, and 20 hours. So it's. That's right. It's a great job. No, it really is. It's a fantastic job. And I've spent a good part of my time when I came in, and by design. I did not want to get trapped in headquarters building. I really wanted to get out and understand the issues from all the players. Obviously, community groups like yours and interested citizens like yours, business groups, writers groups, you name it, and I've been in front of them. Because I think it's very important for me to understand that, because it's, again, as you talked about, it's such an important part of who we are. So that was really the first month and a half has been a lot of that time. In January, I started to focus much more internal on some of the issues there and trying to get to understand the people and some of their concerns and some of their talents, to be frank. Did get to live right through the blizzard, so I got a deep dive in our capabilities, and so that was very, very helpful for me. I've been spent a lot of my time with frontline employees to get to know them and understand what their issues are. I'm a firm believer that that's where it starts, because at the end of the day, there's 13,000 people that work at WMATA. And the vast majority of those are the people that basically deal with the customers day to day. So I need to understand their world and what their challenges are. And also they need to understand me and where I'm trying to take the agency. So as you can imagine, with that type of outreach, I've gotten quite an earful of some of the issues. And some that, as a daily user of the system, that have experienced myself. So there's definitely a sense of frustration out there on some of the service issues, obviously. There's an impatience, I think, in the community on the system itself. That where are we? We're investing these dollars. Where are we getting it back to where we all want it to be? There's obviously a failure in some of the basic service delivery responsibilities that we have. There's been the communication has not been to the standard that it should be, and particularly in today's world of instant communication, we have not performed very well there. And in some cases, unfortunately, a total lack of transparency. And then, sadly, there's a bit of a fear. There's a fear for using the system because of some of the incidents in terms of safety, operational safety, but clearly with some of the incidents that we've recently had in the press with the personal safety of people. So all those are out there, and then there's this other larger field that I think fear that we all have. It's a whole new world out there that we're dealing with terrorism. So all those things are out there, and I think they need to be recognized so that we can go forward. I think it'd be a mistake on my part not to understand that and to face it and then start to deal with it. So we've lost credibility, as an agency over time, and that's what we got to focus on. But some very fantastic things I've heard also is, there is no debate about the importance of this system to the region and to the individuals and to the businesses and into our future, into the environment, into everything that we do. It's central to what we do. And there is no debate about that. Everywhere I go, it's more like we've got to make sure it performs because it is who we are, and it does drive the economy. It does drive our daily life, and so we've got to focus on. We've got to get it back to that. So that's fantastic to have that. I've also found on the staff very, very extremely hardworking staff, committed people that basically feel that we want to get back to where we were. They have a sense of pride in the agency, but they've been taking a hit. And these are individuals. They're neighbors, and so that's fantastic. So those are things we're just going to build on. So my priorities coming in the door. Clearly, there's some big things, and I understand the role this plays in the region and what it's going to play in the future. But my immediate focus has to be on three things, and that's safety, basic service reliability, and we've got to get our fiscal house in order. So those are my, going out the gate, I've got to get those under control. And that's where my focus has been. Safety, I come from the aviation world, and we were just talking at the table with some other aviation people. Safety in the aviation world it's never something that you even debate. It's never something that's even in your mind. It's just who you are. It's what you do. It's how you act as an employee and as someone that works at an airport. It seems that what I've seen is we've fallen into a safety as a compliance issue. And to me, compliance is almost irrelevant. Compliance meaning to deal with the Federal Transit Administration, make sure you're hitting all the bases with them. To me, that's just something you pass along the way. That is not the goal. So we've got to get that, people to understand that and to behave that way. So that has to be number one. I use the system. My 16-year-old daughter uses the system when they come down on weekends and different things, and I'm not going to put them on a system that isn't safe, and I wouldn't expect any of you to, and so I won't, I will not put up with that, and we're going to do everything we can to keep the system safe all the time. That does not mean we will not have incidents. These are big, complex systems. I think there was an incident today in Boston, for instance, with a train up there. I mean, these things occasionally do happen, but that cannot be, that is not acceptable. The other one, obviously, is one of the things I have seen, though, on the safety side, which I was pleased, is we have a excellent relationship with some of our federal players, particularly on the terrorism and on that side of the house. So that was good coming in to see that, because that wasn't something, okay, I've got to figure that out. That's there. So that was very pleased to see that in place, and the communication and the relationship there is very strong. Some of the things we're doing to improve safety, obviously we have FTA, and they've laid out over 200 action items that we have to perform, which we're churning away at. And again, we got to get out of the mindset that that's the goal here, but we do have to hit those. But we are doing things differently. So for instance, now we have the fire department sitting in our rail operations center. So basically a representative from the fire department. So basically if there's any issue related to any of that, it's instantaneously the communication, and they're talking a language to their peers that are coming to these events and dealing with them. So that's fantastic that we have that in place. We now do quarterly drills, and again, in the aviation world, they're called EPLEXs, emergency planning exercises, where literally you do live drills where you would play out a disaster. So now we do those, and we do those quarterly. So that's fantastic. So we're doing one. In fact, we're doing one in Virginia in the next month or so. So that's very important. So it's good to see that, and we'll continue that. I mean, that is what we'll continue. In terms of the second priority, service reliability, the one thing I do want to make clear is, from my perspective, it's not just rail. It's rail, bus, and metro access. It is a system as a whole, and we serve different needs at different times, and different communities have different needs, so we've got to think of it that way. And yes, they link, but also part of our community is dependent upon just certain segments of it, so we don't lose sight of that. And the metro access is performing very well. The bus is actually performing well. All of them can be improved, but overall they're performing very well and managed very well. On the rail side, we need to take a hard look at a number of things that we're currently doing to see if there's other ways to do it, particularly on the maintenance side, how we're doing what we're doing. We have to get, the big issues for us it's three things. It's the cars, it's the track, and it's the ongoing maintenance. So on the car side, the big answer there is the 7000 series cars. We have 748 of those in effect programmed for delivery. We've only got 90 of them to date, and we have only 80 of them out on the system. That is unacceptable. We have a contractor that is not delivering to the level that we've paid for, and so we will not accept those cars until they come off the line at the stage they should, at the level of quality they should, because this is something we're going to live with for another 30 to 40 years. So we have to get them to perform to the level that, in effect, they're contractually obligated to do. So I've met with the president of Kawasaki, who's the vendor. We just recently had the delegation from Virginia, D.C. or Virginia, D.C. and Maryland write a letter to the president of Kawasaki expressing our concern. The plan is actually in Lincoln, Nebraska. So I get to see Lincoln, Nebraska the 29th of this month. So that should be fun. But to reinforce, obviously, how important this is, and literally to hold people's feet to the fire to get those cars in here as quick as we can. And it serves two purposes. Obviously, it increases the reliability, but if you've been on one of those 7000 series, it's obviously a much higher product. With the communication, all the communication things work. It's just a much better car. So we have to get that in place. We've had we've had a parts issue in the past. About a year ago, that we were under such scrutiny by the federal government that basically we went from a purchasing process that followed the federal process versus the process that we had with using local dollars, and that meant it slowed down the process because there were certain things we had to do that. And what that did is once you create a backlog in parts, you create a backlog in cars. And so the board gave us the ability to go back to that process where we could streamline that. So we have 70 cars that we're chipping away at and getting those back into the system. We did restore the 6-minute headways on the Orange Line, and that was a result of the Stadium Armory power issues, but we were able to get that done in December. So we'll continue to do those things immediately, but I have some long-term things that I'll start to sort of roll out in the next 2 to 3 weeks that you'll start to hear about based on my analysis of what we're going to do. But these are some of the things initial that we're doing. In terms of the third priority, fiscal management, that's been well documented in the press as well. For me, it's a bottom line issue in that we're using the fares from the users of the system, and we're using the dollars from the local governments. So we have a responsibility to use those dollars wisely to basically run this like a business, even though it's in a public sector environment, which is very similar to what you do in the airport environment. It has a public function, but it's a business. And that same mentality, I know we can bring here, and we will do that. And we've actually made great strides in that area. But we've got to make sure we're using the dollars efficiently, and we have to be able to show people where we've used the dollars. That's not that, that's not rocket science that we should do that. The other part of that is our capital side. The capital needs inventory. We don't have a capital needs inventory. It hasn't been updated in years. With my background in capital programming and budgeting, I want to see, there should be a large needs inventory, and from that comes a series of projects. And then basically we take those projects and we do analysis on them, we do engineering on them before we then commit to construction and commit to schedules. Unfortunately, I think some of those projects have come up, and we weren't real firm on what they were, what we were getting into. We made commitments, and then guess what? These things drag out, or they're much more expensive than we thought. So that's not the way to do capital budgeting. So that will be one thing that we are changing right now as well. To that end, both on the operating and capital budget, for the operating budget this year, I recommended that we do no fare increase, no cuts in service, and no additional funds from the local governments. So how do you do that? Basically, what we have the opportunity and we have the ability to use federal dollars for operating side of the house. And so it's a one-time deal to keep, in effect, things whole. I felt it was not the time to go out and ask, again, anyone to pay more for the service that we've been providing. So that was the fix to give me a year to get this under control. The same way on the capital budget, we normally go out and we get a commitment for five years from the local governments on the capital side. We've asked for a 1-year commitment on that now, and let us, again, get that capital budgeting up and running the way that it should be, and then we'll come back and say, all right, here's our needs, and now what's the level that you can support? So that'll be, that's the path that I'm recommending to the board going forward, and they'll be making their decisions in the next month or so on that. So with that, let me just conclude. Clearly, there's a lot to do. We didn't get here overnight, but too bad, Wiedefeld. That's your problem, right? I can't. I'm not expecting you to do anything but say that's great, but go fix it. And so I'm fine with that, and we will do that. And I'm confident we will. I'm very confident that we will. Let me just close by saying, when I was younger, and particularly when I was dating my wife at GW, And when I brought people from out of town, and obviously when I saw the hands of people that have been here for the 40 plus years, you'll get this. But to me, you know, this, when I would come to Washington with out-of-state people particularly, it was the mall, it was the monuments, and it was Metro. It was all one thing. And it was, you know, it was a Disney ride, it was part of the experience, it's how you did things. And, you know, there was, I mean, it was just exciting. And so, you know, I want a rebirth of that. You know, I want a rebirth of it internally from our staff, and then obviously in the community. And again, I'm positive we will get there, and I know the community wants to be there. So with that, I'll be glad to take any questions or comments that you might have. Thank you.
Mr. Wiedefeld, one of the criticisms that has been leveled at Metro is, it goes like this, that Metro and its staff has a complete lack of a safety culture. Now, the question to you is, how do you respond to that?
I don't agree with it because I've seen it, and it is there. Is it as strong as it should be? Probably not. It is, I think there's what I've noticed with the organization is it's lots of silos. And so a lot of times part of that breaks down in between. So lack of accountability, I think, drives some of that culture. But I mean, you know, again, in meeting with the operators and the mechanics and the people like that, you know, believe me, they want it to be safe too. They're users of it. Their families are users of it. But in terms of how they think about it, sometimes does not come across as, you know, think, you know, 5, 6, 7 steps ahead, not just react to what you see in front of you. So that's maybe where I do agree with, you know, with that statement, that we're not thinking strategically enough about this. And again, it's just not part of the fabric to do that yet. So that's what I've got to get them to understand.
Charlie?
Thanks. Yeah, Charlie Clark. You know, I still meet people in the area who've never been on the Metro. So I'm wondering if the safety culture and the communication snafus and the fare hikes and all that were resolved, and a whole lot of other people got out of their cars and got on the Metro, would you have the capacity? Can you increase the capacity?
Mm-hmm. We can. Right now we can't because, again, like I said, we're car short, and that's an issue. But obviously the plan is to create the 8-car trains and to build towards that. So, you know, we can build that. Right now, you know, with everything we're doing there, it's a stretch. There's no doubt about it during different periods of time.
As you can see, I'm handicapped. I have multiple sclerosis. You spoke earlier of fear, operation, and safety. I guess I have fear of getting stuck in an elevator going into there. I have seen Metro Access vans around, but I'm embarrassed to admit I don't know how to use Metro Access. Would you consider in your communications and publicity maybe advertising some instructions on how people could use Metro Access? How do you get access? How do you get on it? And who do you contact?
Of course. I'll follow up with you directly to make sure that you understand it. But apparently if we're not doing a good enough job that you couldn't figure that out, you know, just by seeing it, then we're not doing a good enough job, right, to get it out there. So I will take a look at that as well.
Carl Van Newkirk. The Washington Post Sunday had an article about a new smartphone app that would help riders use the Metro. But the article pointed out that the usefulness of this was degraded because some information that was supposed to come from Metro wasn't. And furthermore, that the same kind of information, train identifiers, was being provided by other transit agencies, such as Amtrak, and that when Metro was asked about this, Metro refused to answer or to provide someone to give answers. I think this is totally unacceptable. Would you comment?
I totally agree. And the first thing after I read that article was like, go get the information, give it to them. There's no secrets here. You know, what are you holding back? Now, apparently there was some concern by some of our security people in giving, in effect, live feed of where trains and buses were. I've challenged that. I haven't. They're going to have to convince me why that is. Just, you know, again, I think you see it around the world. You see it in the aviation business. You can get online right now and see every plane that's coming into Reagan. So I'm not sure that I've got to be convinced of that, and so we will get on top of that.
So I represent this part of this group here, the Emergency Preparedness Advisory Commission for Arlington, and recently we had a Metro forum on preparedness, and there's several issues that arose. For example, when you press the intercom button to speak to the operator or the driver, there's challenges with that. A lot of folks don't know about the walkways if you were to exit a train, and a whole number of safety precautions and steps you could take in the event of an emergency. I think your average rider is unaware, and so I'm wondering, are there any plans to make some emergency preparedness and safety campaigns deeper with more information so that riders are more comfortable in the event of an emergency?
Yes, on the emergency button thing, we basically, the different series of cars have different signs on how you use that. I don't know if you noticed that. So we're going to standardize those. And because some say you have to push to talk, and there's confusion, you have to keep pushing, not pushing. The reality is once you push, the operator then has it, and they know they've got you. But what we haven't been doing apparently is we haven't been sort of directing the operators to make sure they're communicating so that the customer knows that. So we've already said, we've created a policy. This is what you do in those situations. In terms of evacuating vehicles, we do not want to promote that. That is the last thing that, obviously at times you may have to do it, but that is not something we want people doing, every time they might feel that there's something going on. It's more dangerous, to do that until it's under control, particularly with the third rail. And yes, there are walkways. Some, they're not all, every one of them is different, having been down those tunnels. And it's not an easy, that is, again, it's the last resort that you want to go to. I think it's more important for us to basically get the emergency responders comfortable with that, and not necessarily the entire population. So that's what we've been doing with these live drills, is basically getting the emergency responders. So it's not something they do in a classroom. When we have those where we have a simulation, we have literally a car that we can smoke up and different things like that. But that's not good enough. We need them to go down, get into the tunnel, deal with the physical aspect of that. It's very difficult. They need to do that, and then just see how dark it is, how moist it can be, all the issues that you have. We want them to experience. That's how we're coming at it.
Chuck Morley, I assume that one of the things on your agenda, at least I hope it is the
I think you said DuPont Circle next. No, it is. There's a combination of issues there. Part of it is obviously the older cars, and we intermingle cars, and that breaks down some of that communication. And then it's a training issue, because again, what you just did occurs, so it's that. But I've also on a number of times we have some very good conductors that are very clear, that are and sometimes entertaining in what they do. They're very caring. We were just on one, I think, yesterday, but I forget where we were going, courthouse, I think it was. And the last car, the doors wouldn't open, and I must have heard it. We must have heard it 20 times. Every time. Don't go to that back door. So anyway, but we have to fix that. The 7000 series fixes that, both electronically, if you've been in one of those, because it tells you what's coming up, and then the system works. But yeah, it's one of the most frustrating things that we have out there for people, and for tourists particularly, or anyone. I mean, even I do it the same thing. You get turned. I think we were just talking about. The next thing you know, you're seeing light. Wait a minute, I wasn't supposed to see light. I'm supposed to be in a tunnel. What did I just do? So I mean, we all do it, right? You get, and if you don't get that reminder, you do forget.
I'm one of the people you referenced in the beginning that Metro has lost because of fear. My fear is of security. What's being done to prevent an active shooter or an extremist with a bomb from going down the Roslyn escalators in the morning rush hour and attacking everybody.
Right. Again, we keep very close coordination with the terrorism task force for this region. There are things that we do visually that you see, and there's things that you don't see. You might have seen the article that we had just recently on our in our state operations security center, where we have the cameras. We have thousands of cameras, but you know, it is an open system. You know, it is an open system, just like malls are open, and so you know, you do your best to make sure that you're keeping your eyes open. And I know it's a cliche, but it is to see something, you know, say something. And I don't think, you know, we want to move to a closed system. I just, you know, as a society, you know, in a lot of things. So that's, you know, I think that's part of our world today. So again, I'm talking this, you know, it's much bigger than us, the issue that you just raised. We've got to make sure that we're doing everything to make sure that we're up to date on the latest intelligence, and we do that, and that basically we're doing everything. Both, you know, different. You know, in the business, it's just different layers. Some you see, some you don't see, and we continue to do that. But you know, I think it's also. I think we all have to be, you know, realize the world we live in, and I wish it could be 100%, but it just can't be.
Could you please describe how your bus tracking works? And my experience with it has been it's anything but real time. I've been there 10 minutes before. Waited 10 minutes after, it wouldn't come. I would call, it would say it's on its way, just wouldn't show up. Right. In this day and age where Uber could tell you if it's 2 minutes or 3 minutes away, or Lyft could give you similar sort of real-time information, why can't you adopt that?
Again, I totally agree with you. It doesn't, and that's, you know, we have to be more open to people that do this, that you know, let's bring the other skill bases, rather than us try to do it, because the reality is we're not doing it, right? So that's what we've got to do, and it gets back to the, you know, the similar question this gentleman just asked, the same thing. We have to just, you know, reach out to other players to do that, to work with us or do it. I recently met with Greater Washington, and you know, and I sort of put out to them, and it was not so much on that issue, but similar issue on the social media side. Why aren't you doing, you know, why aren't you doing better on that? And, you know, I was frank, you know, for me to create that capability, the time that it will take and the talent that I will get, we will already be behind. You know, you know, so I think we've got to be realistic about that. So what I challenged him with is come in with something. Help me get there. What is it? I mean, this is what you do. You know, there's got to be some ways we can work this together. So, you know, I'm much more open rather than trying to keep this all and let me do it. You know, this is such a brilliant region. We have lots of smart people here. Let's figure out other ways to do this. That's the way the world's going, you know. So that's, you know, so it's whether it's tracking the vehicles, whether it's getting out messages. So we will do what we do, but if we can't get out a message of how to use the Metro Access, what does that say, right? There's got to be some other ways to do this. So that is how I'm coming at it, to get at sort of that range of issues that way.
Sir.
Bob Magner, could you explain to me why some of the escalators, which often don't work, are open to the elements? That the rain is pouring into them, snow is blowing into them. Nobody would have machinery in their house that was open to the elements in that way.
Sure. There's a number of things with that. Some of them are architecturally. We can't do them. There's some issues there, whether you can put canopies on top of them because of view sheds and different things. So that's some of the issue with that. And, you know, it does seem counterintuitive, but it's a reality that we have to deal with. In different jurisdictions, there's actually different rules of what you can do, of how you can put those in, and then when you can turn them on. So it would require, for instance, shutting down things totally, building the whole canopy, and then turning it back on, versus other jurisdictions allow us to do that and keep them in motion, for instance. So it's something that I'm aware of that you know, we're trying to figure out. I've actually reached out in the Maryland case. There's a regulatory issue I've got to deal with. In some of the ones in the district, there is this sort of, am I using the right term? Architectural, I guess it's National Park Service. Yeah, National Park Service, for instance. You know, there's issues that way. So, you know, it's again, it's part of the territory. We got to work with them, see if we can figure it out.
And one question, you know, we talked a little bit yesterday. Could you talk a little bit about how you're working on changing the culture? It's not just the safety culture. It's really sort of top to bottom. So at the top, you've got board members that have veto power. At the bottom, you've got station managers that have filthy stations. How are you going to work with that?
Right. One of the things, and hopefully you're sensing it, is I'm fairly direct about the issues. I'm not going to sugarcoat them. They are what they are. Now let's work on them. So I think that starts at the board and goes all the way down to, you know, to the person cleaning the station. So particularly I mentioned this earlier, I think, when I spoke, I'm spending a lot of time with the line employees, again, because they're so important. And to be frank, that hasn't been done. There's a disconnect at several levels here. The higher management team is, you know, sort of over here at headquarters and doesn't have a whole lot of interaction, and that's one issue. And then there's the supervisors and superintendents. They're the people that are dealing with these line employees day to day, and they're not communicating. So I've got to get them, the supervisors and superintendents, to understand where I'm coming from and what they're going to be held accountable for, so that they can then express that to the line employees. And I'm doing the same thing with the line employees. Every line employee I meet, I've asked them, one thing they can do for me. They've asked, in fact, they're thrilled that someone's listening to them because they add a lot. They know stuff that's going on that, you know, I'm not going to hear unless I talk to them. But one thing I ask from them is, A, I need your help, and B, I want you to be proud of your job. You know, the way I frame it to them, we have every 2 weeks we have roughly about 75 new employees come in to the agency, and so I meet with every one of them. And the way I like to frame it to them, if they go to to watch a Caps game or something, or watch something like that, and someone asks them where do they work, where if you go ask someone where do you work, and they say I work for Under Armour, you're gonna think, oh, that's cool, and they're gonna say it like it's cool. If you say Metro, what's the reaction? And that's where we got to get them to, because that's the way I feel about it. But I've got to get them to buy into that as well. So that's, again, there's subtle things. Obviously, it's in the construct of a very complex labor-oriented environment that we work under. That's not an excuse. That's just the way, again, that's fine, that's great. So that's just the way it is. But that does not mean that they don't have the same sense of pride that we all have in our jobs, and we just got to bring that out of them.
So I have two unrelated questions. I'm glad to see that safety is your top priority. But I have two unrelated questions. The first one is, how about building the system to give reliable service during snowstorms and big snowstorms and very big snowstorms? That's the first one. Some transit agencies can do it, and couldn't we? Or at least the underground portion of the system. So that's question one. Question two is not fiscal management, but finance. We need, as we were saying at the table before we started the dinner, a stable and reliable source of funding, capital operations, and maybe it'd be a sales tax, I don't know. Maybe it would be each jurisdiction deciding what its tax would be, but the idea of seeking and obtaining a stable and reliable source of funding for Metro. So two separate questions.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for serving on the board. Yeah, on the Blizzard, let me just explain my logic to that, and you can choose to agree or not to agree. But when that storm was coming, there were two things in my mind, and that was the safety of my employees and the safety of getting people out there, and not guaranteeing that I could get them back. And that's how I apply. That's how I apply the logic, and I will always apply that logic. I think there's nothing worse for our customers than say, we're going to deliver something, and then halfway through it, we can't do it. The other thing that was occurring at that time, if you recall, the storm was to come with very high winds. And we do not have backup power that can run that system. We have backup power that can turn on the emergency lights just like they have here. You're not going to run this place, right? You're going to have some lights to get out. Well, that's fine and good, except if you're on a train in the middle of a tunnel. Now I've got to get all my resources in to get those people out of there. So I was not comfortable that we could do that, nor did I think it was, again, my number one goal was safety, and that means I have to make decisions on safety. Not only do I want my employees to think safety, I have to perform that way. And I think getting to this culture of safety that was come up, twice, that's how you start to do that. Because if I'm saying to my employees, well, just get out there and keep going, and I'm putting them in unsafe situations, because guess what? They have to get there too. They have to get back and forth to work. So, that is, and it's a tough, I've taken some hits on it, but I stand behind that decision. I think it was the right decision to do, particularly what we knew at the time. And then, the reality was it was a fantastic storm. It was, one of the biggest one we've ever had. So, and other properties, you're correct, sir. I mean, they do. But, as you know, in the aviation world, we always say if you've been to one airport, you've been to one airport. So, it's tough. Every system has different things. How our third rail is compared to someone else's third rail, even what their power is could be totally different than what we have. And always remember, we only have 2 tracks. That's all we've got. We don't have 4. So anything that happens on one of those tracks, we are doing a workaround, and you got to wait till that clears, and then you got to wait for the other one to come by. So that's, that is just an operational challenge that we have to deal with or live with. But that then is going to drive decisions differently than how they make when New York, Chicago, Paris, or London. It's just a reality. And so I have to do a better job of explaining that to people, getting people to understand that. In terms of the financial side of the house, the finance side of the house, when you look at major properties around the country, they do have that, a stable funding source. My perspective on that is, I'm not looking for a stable funding source to try to get more money. I think that's a different discussion. I think that's a discussion that should be made based on merit and what you deliver and what you're trying to get to. The stable funding source from my point of view is, to me, this is first and foremost a regional system and not a local system. And we need to make decisions regionally and think regionally. And then, as I mentioned yesterday, I come from the school of follow the money. And if the money's coming from local levels, then of course they're going to protect their money and they want to know what they're getting for it. So it's just natural. That's very understandable. But until we have something that's more stable and potentially more regional, that's what we're in. And again, it's been 40 years, and it's delivered a lot in those 40 years with that funding structure. But when you look at other major systems, they don't go through a lot of those battles year in, year out because they have a stable source, whatever it is, that says, okay, here's the regional source. We accept that this is a regional good that we all want, and now we're going to, in effect, commit to that. So that is what's different here.
I've been on a plane before, and planes have air marshals, and I look for them when I get on planes, just because freak thing that I do. But have you ever considered maybe, and when addressing the safety concerns of your passengers, have you ever considered maybe implementing a resource like that on trains and buses, where you have someone who is supposed to ride these trains and buses all day, every day, to ensure the safety of the passengers? They don't have to be marked. They could be plain. And it doesn't have to be every car, every train, maybe, one person a train that just floats in and out, because I've seen some of the videos on Facebook and YouTube of some of the horrendous acts that happen, and maybe if there was a presence there that people were aware of and they couldn't see, but they just knew it was there, they wouldn't be so tempted to do such foolish things. And my second question is, my mom rides Metro a lot for work. I'm a weekend Metro person, and so I just want to know, about the unscheduled repairs. It's really hard for her to get to work when she shows up and oh, all of a sudden something's down and there was no information given about that. So do you have any remarks about that?
Sure. On the safety issue, the way that we manage the police force, our police force, is basically we have a ComStat program where literally they meet weekly. They're reviewing all incidents in the entire system. They're taking intel from the district and other areas, and basically they're applying their resources that way. That's how we do it. So, you know, the reality is there are certain areas that we just don't have to have a big police presence, and there's others that we do. We do it both undercover and you know, in uniform. One of my things that drives me a little nuts is we tend to have our police officers and a number of our employees basically in dark blue uniforms that blend in with the crowd. That's not acceptable to me. I think they need to be much more visible so people can see it, feel it. Hey, someone's in charge here, and I think that will help. So that will be, you'll be seeing that shortly. But I mean, that's, you know, I mean, statistically, it's a very, very, very safe system. You know, we have roughly 6 Part 1 crimes per million passengers. So that's very small. That does not mean anything to when you see an event like we had at NOMA or anywhere else, right? So I totally understand that. But they do a very good job of basically getting out there, and the community does. I mean, you know, so that is a good thing. But you know, I wish I had the answer for that. I'm sure a lot of people wish they had the answer for that in a lot of environments, whether it's a mall or wherever you might be. You know, unfortunately, you can experience some things that are just terrible. So, I mean, all we can do is continue to work on that. We do have now, for instance, we have a district police officer now that works directly in our operations center on the police side now to deal with some of those issues. We're reaching out to the schools to see if we can get, you know, better communication. Again, put a face of who this is, who we are, why it's, you know, why, and we want to take operators with us and people that, you know, like their peers, and say, look, these are just people just like, you know, your mom and dad working here. Don't behave this way. And the other thing is, you know, the reality is anyone that does something here, we pretty much catch you, particularly on the rail side, because we've got film of you somewhere. And I mean, just about every one of these incidents, we're getting to people. That doesn't help prevent it, but hopefully it does send the message. You might want to think of somewhere else because we're going to get you. In terms of the service outages, there's 2 sets of things that are going on there. One is non-peak hours when we're doing track work. Again, 2 tracks. If you want to touch a track, you have to go around it, which causes those issues. I want to take a look at that whole program of how we've been doing that. I think there's some other ways we could be doing that. It will be some pain in other ways, but I think we want to have that discussion. But then there are things that occur, you know, that can occur at any moment. You know, we're monitoring that, and what we can do about some others we can't. So, for instance, if we have an ill person on a train, it stops. The train sits on that track. We have to go around it. That's what happens. If we had with these weathers up and down, we have cracked rail, and it's physics, and that occurs. And then we got to get people in there, repair it either temporarily, weld it in place, whatever we got to do. So those things, you know, that is unfortunately part of a system like this. But there's other things where we have breakdowns, particularly on cars, that again I think we can do much better of maintenance to prevent that from happening.
Okay. Thank you. Long-time rider. Metro was built for a sleepy southern town. You know, you've got 3 lines now, sometimes 2 lines during one track. It's one problem messes up 3 lines. Is it time to tell the riding public that things just aren't going to be as they were, and you know you're just going to have to dumb down or turn down your expectations?
It's a good question. I think that we do have to be more realistic of what's achievable and what's not. I think we've seen that you can only fit so much through a small tube. You know, that's what we've seen. You know, with those 3 lines particularly. You know, that's just reality of what we have out there. I'm not sure we've educated people about that well enough. particularly before decisions get made on some of the stuff that we're doing. So we have to do a better job at that for sure. But, you know, where I'm coming from is we have to, what we have to perform at a certain level, period. And if we perform with what we have at a certain level, that's the best we can do. I don't think we're doing the best we can do. Then there's going to be those other constraints, you know, that you're talking about. But, you know, we have not performed, you know, we're not putting out the service as best as we should. And I think that's the first thing that we have to do.
Hi, I'm Bill Huddleston. I do have a question. I actually, summers during college, I worked building Metro. So the 40 seconds that it takes you to go from Ballston to Virginia Square, I spent a summer in that trench. And actually the answer to Bob's question, and this kind of goes to your point about civic pride, is the reason that at the time of it was built that there were no escalators no coverings on the escalators, is that the engineers had gone around to all the world subway systems and said both what would you do and what would you not do, and the one said don't put any covering at the top of an escalator because then everybody backs up at the end of the escalator. Boston said if you don't want rats, don't sell food, you know. So so that's the background on that. But and this goes to my point of yours about the civic pride. You know, I mean, you know, do you have ideas for how to address that? I mean, I'll throw out one, you know, flat fare on July 4th, just $1, you know, something like that. So something you can do that's not, I mean, okay, there's a financial hit to that, but it's simple. You obviously have a lot of out-of-town visitors, you know, so.
Yes, I think there's a number of things that we can do to celebrate what we do, you know, as a system. Giving a lot of free rides away probably isn't high on the list. Just, you know, give them the financials of that. But I think there's other things we can do. You know, one of the things, you know, again, I keep harping back to some of these aviation things, but I think that is some of the things I bring to the table, some different thoughts on this. But, you know, I had 200 volunteers at BWI Airport that would work from 5 a.m. to 11 at night. And they would stand around the whole airport and just help people do whatever. You know, I don't know if that's doable here, but why not try it? You know, I think there's a lot of people that say, okay, this is my neighborhood station. I'm willing to give 2 hours a week or whatever. And, you know, particularly during, you know, big events, you know, to promote things. You know, I don't know if that works, but, you know, I think thinking out of the box a little bit would be good. And it gets at tapping into that civic pride of the system.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I have a basic question, but I just want to say a couple of things first. First, thank you for taking the job. Thank you for... Second, I have to say, I'm still thinking about Libby's comment that this is only the second time you've been a general manager and with all your years in service, which is saying something really troubling about the previous people. So again, thank you for taking the job. And now I have a proposal or just a question to see if you've been thinking about this. It ties into incremental ways to improve safety, which also tie into, you know, fiscal viability of the system. It goes to safety, and it's about signage and other measures to communicate on a regular basis when people are in the system. I have to tell you, you know, I guess I had the gift of being very ill some years back, which allowed me to actually need to be able to find my way in and out of the station quickly. I had taken it for years and knew it by you know, but suddenly I became a person who needed to read my way through the stations. Those signs are so confusing. You can't, they're not obvious when you get off a train in terms of which way the escalator is, which way there's the right exit to which street. You end up walking in one way and then you have to walk in back. Now, this is relevant on safety relating to disabilities, safety relating to people who are just having difficulty, tourists, evacuation, emergencies, and crime. So it's low tech, but how about bigger signs and doing it via focus groups for people who don't know the station, walking through with members of staff and doing outreach to kind of say, where are you looking? Can you figure out what do you need to see here? Have you thought about that yet? And if
I haven't actually. I was going to ask you to be part of a focus group because that's the only way we're going to get there. Seriously, because just like you were when before you had to experience that, you did it by rote. Well, that's the way a lot of our people think.
Exactly.
I mean, they've been around there for 20, 30 years. I need people that have not been there and just plop down and try, tell us what you need as along the way.
Yes, you're right.
That's what I say. I want to set up,
Sign us up.
Set up focus groups, volunteers, in effect, to do that. So
Okay.
I'll have the, I'll work through Scott.
Yeah,
This is a good group to tap into. And then we'll just get the communication people to set up a group, and we'll hit some stations here in the local community. I want to do it by local community. I think it makes sense.
Okay, and I'm sorry, you're so responsible. I'll just throw this out. Also for outreach, think about the ubiquitous approach on your website of a question of the week or 2 questions of the week on surveys on a regular basis for people who are using and not using, so you can continue to get inputs on how you're doing.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. These were great questions, and thank you to Paul Wiedefeld for presenting and speaking with us tonight. Let's give him a big round of applause.